So what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrate my history as someone with schizophrenia for the last 35 years. And I'm going to punctuate the narration by reading passages from my book. I eventually won a Marshall Scholarship to study philosophy at Oxford. And there my world really started falling apart. I became officially mentally ill. It started out looking more like depression with mild paranoid features, but over time developed into more of a psychotic thought disorder than a mood disorder. In any case, I became very depressed and lost a lot of weight. At 5'10", I weighed under 100 pounds. I became very socially isolated. I thought that I shouldn't talk. I thought that speaking would spread my evil around, and it's hard to make friends if you don't talk. I also believed many people were talking about me and laughing at me behind my back, which might have been true because I looked quite a sight walking around the Oxford campus talking to myself and gesticulating. And I found myself unable to work, which for me is the last thing to go. More alarmingly, I began to have vivid fantasies of killing myself because I thought I was such a terrible person. Dousing myself with gasoline and lighting a match was my preferred approach. My GP urgently sent me to a psychiatrist who urged me to check into the Warrensford Hospital, and eventually I did go. Quoting from the text, "I was not getting better. I was also very resistant to the idea of taking drugs. The drug center had instilled that in me. But then one day something happened that changed my way of thinking, that changed everything. I looked into a mirror. It was the first time I'd actually seen myself in weeks, and it felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. Good God, I thought, who is that? I was emaciated and hunched over like someone 3 or even 4 times my age. My face was gaunt, my eyes were simultaneously vacant and full of terror. My hair was wild and filthy, my clothes wrinkled and stained. It was the visage of a crazy person on the long-forgotten back ward of a hospital for lunatics. I was scared of dying, but even more scared of what I saw in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was in some kind of terrible, terrible trouble. I vowed that I'd do whatever I needed to do to get her out of this place in any way I possibly could. The choice seemed clear, drugs or death. I went off immediately to find my doctor, and I said to her, okay, yes, I'll take your drugs, the words all running together, ending the passage. I got out of the hospital as fast as I could. It took about a month, and I determined never to come back again. I was not going to be one of those revolving door patients. This would be my first, my last, my only hospitalization. And then several months later, I did come back. So much for resolve. The hospital referred me to a famous psychiatrist and psychoanalyst named Dr. Anthony Storr, who consulted to the Warrensford Hospital. By his questions, he really wanted to know what I was thinking and feeling and fantasizing. I felt really heard. Quoting from the text, Dr. Storr's recommendations were simple. Your mind is very sick, he said calmly, and just as I'd advise with a sick body, it needs a specific kind of exercise to help it heal. To me, that means resuming the work you love. It makes you happy, it gives you purpose, it challenges you. And so you need to stay at Oxford in your program. Ending the passage. The Oxford doctors were all recommending that I withdraw from school and go back to America. Storr was right. So I decided to go to Yale for law school, which was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I arrived there in August, and without a Mrs. Jones to turn to, my thoughts started spiraling more and more out of control. I was doing well academically, but then started to be unable to work. Again, that's always the last thing for me to go. Later, I was involuntarily admitted to the hospital, and the doctor said that I was not only dangerous to self and others, but also gravely disabled. And the reason they wrote I was gravely disabled is I couldn't do my Yale Law School homework. And that made me wonder about much of the rest of New Haven. Were they committable as well? I was forced to stay at the Yale Infirmary, but after a couple of hours, they kicked me out as too difficult to manage. Kicked out of student health, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I then had a major and public breakdown the 7th week of my first semester at the Yale Law School. Quoting from the text, I greeted my 2 classmates, Rebel and Val, in the Yale Law School library at 10 o'clock on a Friday night. We had made the date to work on our memo assignment together, but then didn't get far before I was talking in ways that made no sense. Memos are visitations, I informed them. They make certain points. The point is on your head. Pat used to say that. Have you ever killed anyone? Rebel and Val looked at me as like they or I had been splashed in the face with cold water. What are you talking about, Ellen? Oh, the usual, you know. Heaven and hell, who's what, what's who. Hey, I said, leaping out of my chair, let's all go out on the roof. It's okay, it's safe. I hurried to the nearest large window, opened it, then climbed through and stepped out onto the roof. A flat surface and not at all scary. A few moments later, Rebel and Val followed, and they asked what had gotten into me. "This is the real me," I announced, waving my arms above my head. And then, late on a Friday night on the roof of the Yale Law School library, I began to sing, and not quietly either. "Come to the Florida Sunshine Bush. Do you want to dance?" "Are you on drugs?" one asked. "Are you high?" "High? Me? No way. No drugs. Come on, let's dance. Come to the Florida Sunshine Bush where they make lemons, where there are demons." "You're frightening me," one of them said, and then Rebel and Val headed back inside. I shrugged and followed them. Back inside, I asked my classmates, "Are you having the same experience of words jumping around the pages as I am? I think someone's infiltrated my copies of the cases. We've got a case to joint. I don't believe in joints, but they do hold your body together." So an example of kind of loose associations where words are associated with each other but don't make sense. This was more than either of them had bargained for, and they quickly left, although I insisted on staying. Eventually, made my way back to my room, and once there, I couldn't settle down. My head was too full of noise, too full of oranges and law memos I could not write and mass murders I knew I would be responsible for. Sitting on my bed, I rocked back and forth, moaning in fear and isolation, ending the passage. There's actually a funny story with Rebel. That's his real name. He was a breech birth in Alabama, so his mom named him Rebel. But anyway, when I went to do the book, I found out that he was an entertainment lawyer at one of the big firms in LA, so I asked him if he would represent me. And he said, "What's your book about?" And I told him, "Well, it's a book about my mental illness, and you know, Rebel, you're really in it." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, do you remember the scene on the roof of the Yale Law School?" He said, "How could I forget?" The next morning, I went to my professor's office and started gibbering unintelligibly to him as I had to my classmates the night before. Eventually, he took me to the ER. When I got there, we sat down with the admitting nurse, and I mentioned how my friend, Dr. Pritchard, had terrible stomach pains and should be admitted immediately, and then I started laughing hysterically. A few moments later, I found myself in a small room with a big attendant, and I started snapping my telephone wire belt, which I'd made earlier before, through the air, and he asked for the belt, and I gave it to him, quoting from the text. "But you can't have my 6-inch nail," I said, patting my pocket. Then someone just going to call, the doctor arrived. "Give that to me," he said. "No," I said. He immediately called for security. Another attendant came in, this one not so nice. Once he'd pried the nail from my fingers, I knew I was done for. Within seconds, the doctor and his whole team of goons swooped down, grabbed me, lifted me out of the chair, and slammed me down on a nearby bed with such force that I saw stars. Then they bound both my legs and arms to the metal bed with thick leather straps. A sound came out of my mouth that I'd never heard before, half groan, half scream, purely human, barely human, and pure terror. Then the sound came again, from somewhere forced from deep within my belly and scraping my throat raw. "No," I shouted, "stop this, don't do this to me." I glanced up to see a face watching the entire scene through the window in the steel door. Why was she watching me? Who was she? I was an exhibit, a specimen, a bug impaled on a pin and helpless to escape. "Please," I begged, "please don't do this to me. This is like something from the Middle Ages. Please, no." Ending the passage. 5 months of hospitalization ensued. Hospitalization involving long-term restraints and seclusion, forcible medication, and especially in the beginning, a drastic loss of privacy. I was watched often while I took showers and went to the bathroom. For several weeks at one of the hospitals, I was never allowed to speak to anyone outside the presence of staff, including my parents.